I watched him discreetly for several weeks. My neighbor, the mysterious gardener, came every Saturday morning. His wide-brimmed straw hat was pulled up to his eyebrows, and he was ready for work. He always had the same mysterious smile that sent shivers down my spine. I confess I was fascinated by his meticulous approach to his work, his passion for his favorite tool, his 32 cm hedge clippers, always shiny and sharpened. One day, as I was watering my plants, he approached the fence, surprising me. Lost in my thoughts, I heard his voice. "Your garden could use a little care, don't you think?" he said with a wink. I raised an eyebrow, half amused, half intrigued. "Really? And you think your tool is up to the task?" I replied. He smiled playfully, and I watched him scrutinize my garden. "I have a feeling that my tool could completely transform your little patch of green," he replied. I couldn't help but blush under his intense gaze, but curiosity proved stronger than shyness. I let him enter, eager to see where this interaction would lead. With the confidence of a connoisseur, he entered my garden and placed his belongings near my flower beds. Then he took out his hedge-trimming knife, examined it like a jewel, warming it up with a few slow, calculated strokes. It was as fascinating as it was unexpected. Trimming the hedge and replanting bushes with incredible precision, he occasionally cast mischievous glances in my direction. The garden was gradually transforming, and I was overcome with excitement. I had to recognize his talent. Each haircut was a work of art. When he finished, the sun was already setting, coloring the sky a golden hue. The golden light cast a warm glow over the garden, making every flower and every trimmed leaf seem almost magical. Gasping, he turned to me with a mischievous smile and said he was ready for another gardening date next week. I nodded, my cheeks flaming, amused by the thought of this unusual routine. Each week he came with his tool, and gradually what started as a simple gardening job turned into a bond full of unspoken understanding. Saturdays followed one after another, and soon the garden work became nothing more than an excuse for these secret, exciting dates. Our conversations grew longer and our laughter more frequent, mingling with the rustling of leaves and the chirping of birds in the background. Until that day, when he was about to leave, he put his hand in mine. "Maybe next week we can spend some more time together. I know the place even better than this garden." It took me nothing more than to feel a whirlwind of sensation sweep over me. He was so much more than just a neighbor or an experienced gardener. He became that spark of mystery in my life, that daring moment I dared not even dream of. For a week I thought of him, envisioning the following Saturday, and a thrill of anticipation filled my days. The following Saturday, the garden seemed to almost glimmer with anticipation. I prepared some refreshments and wore a more casual outfit, subtly hinting at the impatience that had been building up in me for days. He arrived as usual, his hat pulled over his eyes, a smile on his lips, but this time something in his gaze seemed more intense, as if our weeks of silent collaboration had created an invisible bond. It was as if the air between us had become charged, and even the garden seemed to hold its breath. I invited him in for a drink before we started work, and for the first time we talked about more than just gardening. He told a few anecdotes about his work and the beauty of the gardens he had transformed, but more importantly, he shared bits of himself, a life that seemed lonely and mysterious to me. It was strange because the more he spoke, the more I felt something unfolding inside me, that what started as a joke was turning into a real connection. His stories were filled with moments of solitude, of searching for meaning, and I found myself relating to his words more than I expected. "This garden is beautiful," he said, looking around, "but sometimes it's not just about pruning or beautification. Sometimes you have to have the courage to redo things, to start from scratch." He was right. This garden wasn't perfect. There were messy corners, overgrown hedges, but the same was true of me. This life I was leading without real enthusiasm, without much passion. I was this uncharted space waiting for something new, something daring. His words resonated with me, and I realized that, like my garden, I needed someone to help me bring out the best in myself. "Okay," I muttered almost defiantly, "show me how you transform a garden." His eyes lit up, and without a word, he picked up his tool and set to work, but this time with measured slowness, as if he wanted to prolong every moment. I watched him mesmerized. Every movement of his hand, every precise gesture, suddenly seemed more charged, more intimate. The way he handled his brush cutter made me lose track of time, and under his touch my bushes took on a whole new shape. Each cut, each stroke seemed to have a deeper meaning, as if he was slowly peeling away the layers of my protected essence. After a moment, he stopped, set the tool aside, and stood in front of me, letting the tension vibrate between us. Strange, isn't it, this garden? You, me, I feel like I've spent my whole life trimming hedges, never stopping to admire what I'm creating. I felt my heart pounding. He moved closer so I could feel his breath on my skin, and then gently placed his hand on my neck, peering into my eyes. "It may be just a garden to you," he whispered, "but it's so much more than that to me." His voice was low, filled with something raw and real, and I felt my defenses crumble. Without waiting for an answer, I leaned toward him, and after a moment, his lips met mine. The kiss was soft and deep, filled with the tension that had built up over the weeks. Around us, the garden became a silent witness to this stolen moment. The outside world seemed to dissolve, leaving only our breathing in this shared excitement. The scent of freshly cut bushes and the warmth of the evening air enveloped us, making everything else seem distant and insignificant. From then on, the garden became our secret. He came every Saturday morning, and although we continued to trim the hedges and tend the plants, our bond only grew stronger. We learned to understand each other's gestures, to exchange glances. Words were no longer required. It was the language of his hands, the way he approached me, the gentle touch on my shoulder as he passed. There was an unspoken promise in every look, in every smile, and it made every Saturday seem like an adventure. One day, when the garden was at its peak, a veritable paradise of peace and beauty, he looked at me with a serious expression. "What if instead of working here every Saturday, you came to look at my own garden?" Surprised, I agreed without hesitation. This invitation meant more than what it brought. I was ready to cross the threshold, to enter his world and find out what lay behind the mystery that surrounds him. The idea of seeing his personal space, of peeking into his life, filled me with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. When I arrived at his house the next day, the garden seemed surprisingly wild, almost overgrown, but filled with raw beauty. There were brightly colored flowers, tall trees, and hidden corners that hinted at 1,000 secrets. "A little chaotic," he said, shrugging, "but I think it's just right for me." I smiled, thinking that, like his garden, he needed someone to help bring out its best sides, to tweak the structure without destroying its wildness. It was as if he was finally letting me in, letting me see the unpolished, unspoiled parts of himself that he'd been hiding. As if, for the first time, he was showing me a part of himself he had never revealed. After dinner, we gardened together, rearranging the beds, laughing and talking about everything and nothing. The scent of earth and flowers was in the air, and our laughter echoed through the garden. It was natural, effortless, as if we had been doing this for years. Dusk came, and under the pink rays of the setting sun, I realized how important he had become in my life. The garden, with all its chaos and beauty, seemed a reflection of our journey, imperfect, wild, but undeniably real. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he turned to me and his eyes filled with warmth. "Thank you for helping me today," he said quietly. "I think this garden is starting to look a little better." I reached out and took his palm in mine. "I think it's beautiful," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. And in that moment I realized that this was just the beginning of something deep, something lasting. Together we would cherish this garden and everything else that lay ahead, just as we cherished our connection, one careful step at a time.